Hi, welcome back to my channel. Richard Tang, CEO of Zen Internet, here today with Tom Rigg, the soon-to-be CEO of BARN. Tom, a very warm welcome to Zen.
Thank you for having me. It's an honour to be here.
And you're going to be promoted to CEO from COO on
Correct.
the 1st of September, so a couple of weeks.
Yep.
Couple of weeks' time.
Yep, that's it.
Tell us a bit about that promotion, because I understand that Michael Lee, the current CEO,
Yes.
is stepping down, but he's staying with the company and moving abroad.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to start with that, really, that Mike and I have been working for 3.5 years together, and he has been the CEO, I've been the COO, and we've been taking BARN forward as a partnership, if that makes sense. And when Michael's family was presented with an opportunity that they just couldn't refuse, okay, it's an exciting opportunity for their family, he's in support of that, right? And so his family is going to move abroad. However, his involvement in BARN and what we've created over those 3.5 years is something quite special. So actually, in the discussions with Michael and the board, we said, actually, there's a real opportunity here for Michael to be a chief strategy officer, which is where we're looking at the senior stakeholders that we're dealing with in the industry, and it's also to do with the company finances and so on. And it's great that we're in this very fortunate position that we can retain Michael as a member of the board and as a chief strategy officer, working with myself as the CEO as we create this new executive and SMT within the company. I'm very excited for it.
Right, and in the world of hybrid meetings, hybrid board meetings will be the thing?
We already do it. So, we use Microsoft Teams as the, the system for it, and it works really well. We hold some board meetings in person, some are remote, and even working. With our staff, we have remote working and flexible working as part of our policy, right? So, some people can work on project work at home, and they can join in via remote Teams access and all the rest of it, and it's set up in a way that it's seamless. This is the new age of working, I think, and we really support it. So yes, so Michael being remote will work, no problem at all, because we already have that function.
Yeah. I mean, at Zen, since COVID, about 20% of our workforce on a typical day come into this office, about 80% work from home. Works fine.
It's great to hear that. It's very similar to us, and there are some disciplines that need to be in the office, and it's all about the engineering and picking up the equipment in the vans and going and do the installs. Absolutely fine, but certainly people have found it very beneficial, and COVID was a trigger really in all of the different project work that they had to do, all the planning, the network planning, engagement with the communities. That's all off-site. And it's absolutely fine.
Yeah, good. Anyway, let's get into the nuts and bolts of BARN, because BARN, really different and interesting business, could potentially be one of the answers to the evils of capitalism, which I've got a particular thing about.
Sure.
Tell me about BARN. How is it different?
Yep. Well, the thing with BARN is we were set up in 2011, right, some time ago now, and first connections were made in 2012. And we made some fundamental decisions, and one of those decisions was, rather than it being anything to do with making money, it was all to do with serving the communities and a case of bringing them the connectivity that they needed. Because in the current programs at the time, fibre wasn't included, and so we decided, well, if you look at the technology, that is going to be the way. So let's adopt it now. And when we worked with our communities, we said, well, instead of just working on some of the, maybe more commercially beneficial areas to go to, we said, no, well, we'll include everybody because they all need this. Why should anybody be left out? And so if you think about all the different fundamentals of why are we doing this thing, it is all around making sure that those people in very deeply rural communities who are very dispersed get the connectivity they need, and they should be treated fairly. They should be treated in the same way. And that's how it started. Originally, it was only going to be a localised set of parishes around the Lancaster area. And, it soon became apparent that as we were building in those areas, the next parishes said, hang on a minute, this is working, we'd like this please. And so we added them into the plan, and it was organic growth. You know, more parishes on more parishes, more communities getting involved, and it really started working. And then this was all before government subsidy, right? And we were doing it all themselves. And the funding mechanism was that those communities raised the investment to install the network. And then, you know, and this wasn't cash payments in, this was investment in. And so in the future, they could take that back out again once it was built and the revenues were being generated from it. So that was the model. And, you know, as we go down time, government subsidy came along and we thought, well, this is brilliant. We can look to this and see if we can help more communities get on board, and the rest is history, so to speak. You know.
Yeah, and you're a community benefit society.
Correct.
I understand. So
correct.
Very different from a for-profit limited company,
yes.
like Zen, for example.
Sure.
What is the difference? What does that mean?
So one of the big reasons we set this up was we could have done it as a private limited company, but really when we were engaging with the communities, they wanted absolute assurance that we weren't in the position of making profits, and those profits were then going outside of those communities. So the reason as a community benefit society is that as we're working with those communities, the revenues generated, and then once surplus is available, that has to be reinvested back into that community. It cannot go outside. So that's the thing that is exciting for the future of Barn, is that these communities have been working to build their networks, and during that time of building networks, that money goes into the support, the operations, and everything to do with that. Once they're in a position of surplus, guess where that's going? Yeah. And so that was when, you know, in engaging with the communities, they were saying, excellent technology, all right, that's a tick. You know, the funding mechanism, well, we're in control of that, that's a tick. And, you know, what happens with the future of the company? And it remains in the control of the shareholders and those communities, tick. Right, we're on board. Yeah. We're happy to work with you. So that was one of the really big reasons why it was set up as a community benefit society.
And the level of engagement must be huge, because a lot of your customers are shareholders.
Correct.
I guess, in the business. Just as a practicality, I'm just imagining a village.
Sure.
And you go to a village, maybe it's got 100 people or something.
Yeah.
And you say, okay, community, we want to put fibre. And some people are, yeah, you know, I'll invest in that. And then other people are like, no, I'm not interested. But of course, when you build the network, it's almost for the equal benefit of everyone. So how do you get around that situation where some people are putting a disproportionate amount of money in to effectively subsidise their less engaged neighbours?
No, I see where you're coming from here, and it's the same in every community, in that you have your early adopters, right? So you have the people who you go to and say, this is brilliant. And, you know, it isn't that Barn wants to go in here, it's that Barn is, you know, being pulled into these areas as being a solution. So it isn't that, you know, we're not forcing ourselves on anybody. It's a case of, you know, there's a real demand for this thing, so we're going to, you know, help each other in getting it there. And so you have your early adopters, right, and they really back it. They're really excited about the technology and what it's going to bring, and they put their funds in, sure. And then those people talk to others, and you start to get this moving, that more and more people start investing. But this is all at the planning stage, right? So nothing's happened on the ground. So there's no activity other than all of the great meetings that we have. At some point, we will trigger the build. Okay, and the trigger of the build in these areas isn't when everything is completely settled, where we know we've got 100% of everything lined up. It's a case of you're managing the risk as you go along, and you're saying at a certain point, we've got all the early adopters that we believe we can get, and we've got all of the people on board. The people who come after that want to see the machines in the ground, and then they'll invest. All right, and so the model carries on. So you build your first route, let's say. So we build an incoming route, and we put the green cabinet online, and we bring the internet in. The very first thing we usually connect is either a community hall, a community shop, a place of worship, a local primary school. Those are the very first things that we look to put on. And they're all free, by the way. We don't charge for those. Okay, so the service goes in there. Community hall's a good one because people can come in, they can start to use it. They connect the phone, they bring their iPad, and they go, oh, hang on, this is real. And then after it becomes real, they say, yes, okay, I'll put my my investment in now. And then you see another tranche of investment come in, and then the rest is history, so to speak, as in each of these communities, that's what they do, and we run through the program, and by the time the whole network is finished, the funding isn't a problem. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You mentioned government subsidy, and you've seen the whole journey of BDUK government subsidy, starting from when there wasn't any to today. Yeah. So the big question, is it a waste of taxpayers' money? Is it a good use of taxpayers' money? Or, as the audience of Links said, is it a good idea done badly?
I think we have to appreciate how hard that job is. If you look at all the other operators and their commercial plans, where it's viable for them to go, and they're deploying here, there, and they might go there and they might not go somewhere else. And then you've got to try and work out, how are you going to fund another altnet or another operator to come in to fill these gaps? The gaps are moving. The gaps are moving all of the time. So I think there needs to be an appreciation of how hard that job is. And certainly I can speak from our experience in it. And our experience has been the demand-led intervention of the vouchers, which have had various different iterations. And we've been able to engage with them throughout. And we've been sustainably delivering with it throughout. So you have a moment now where you're entering into the big regional procurements. You have different types of this and different operators engaging in different ways with different coverage and all the rest of it. But that isn't demand-led. These guys are coming in, they're putting the network in, and then they're generating the demand. Whereas for us, we see it that, on the demand side, I think they got it right. The vouchers are interesting because they could be used in two fundamental ways. One is to say, here's a property, we know it requires subsidy, so you'll get support at a certain level for that property, whatever it turns out to be. Operator builds to it, they use their funding and the subsidy funding, and they connect that property. Now, the way we work is we say, okay, we'll look at an entire area, and we'll see, okay, well, how many are eligible for vouchers in that area, and what sort of funding level support are we going to get? Instead of saying, well, we're going to do that one, and that one, and just do the vouchers, we say, okay, well, this is enabling us to come into that entire area, to put 100% of fibre into all of them. Because some of them might not be eligible, but it could be for a reason where they're still not actually getting fibre right now. It could be planned sometime in the future, but they can't get a subsidy. So we say, okay, well, we'll go and put the fibre in for all of them, and we'll connect all these vouchers, and the ones without the vouchers along the way who still want it and still build that network. So, long story short, I think there's been quite a bit of friction in how we're going about filling in these very rural and these final connections. I think it's a very tough job. I think certain of these things are done very well.
Yeah. So if you were to rate BDUK on a scale of 1 to 10, of 10 being as good as they could get in the complex circumstances and 1 the other end of the scale, where would you pitch them?
That's a difficult question, isn't it? At the end of the day, appreciating the job that they've got to undertake. They're in the high end. They're absolutely the high end, right? Does that make sense? Yeah, fantastic.
One thing, there are many things that are unique and different about Barn, and one is the fact that you will connect everyone in a community, and they might be kilometres along their own farm track, but you're not going to leave them out.
No.
Even though the economics of that individual service would not stack up on a spreadsheet, and many competitors that also build to rural would say, well, beyond 100 metres or however long, there's excess construction charges that individual user needs to pay. So again, a really interesting decision from Barn.
Yep.
And
so the way this works is that we galvanise an entire community, and they start to get the understanding that the guy at the top of the hill, it will cost 40,000. There's just no getting away from it. There are construction costs in the meterage of the duct, the fibre, the ploughing, the road crossings, the river crossings, and all the rest of it. That's real. But in that community coming together, they are all accepting that we shouldn't be charging that guy at the top of the hill 50 grand to connect. and then the people in the centre of the small village pay £100 to connect. I mean, these are just arbitrary numbers, right? But it's a case of saying, well, if everybody comes together and as a community we support bringing fibre into that community, then everybody invests to cover that whole area. So there are no excess construction charges, right? Everybody invests instead. And so, you know, the guy at the top of the hill doesn't have to pay or invest 50 grand. He's at the same level as everybody else in that community. And they all back it, right? I mean, we've done this time and time again in that we haven't found a community that doesn't want to support this. Mm-hmm. You know, they all come together. And this is at the parish level, I have to say. It's at the sort of Church of England or civil parish level in where we're concentrating. This is where people are attaching themselves to that community element. This is us, mm-hmm. right? And together, yeah, I mean, the economics are crazy if you want to go and just do them. And that's the point, actually. It wouldn't work if we just did the guys at the top of the hill.
Yeah.
It just would not work. And I think that's part of perhaps the issue at the moment, is that what we're seeing is certain areas being connected and the very, very hard to reach ones aren't actually being a part of that solution from day one. And so they're now saying, oh, well, how are we going to connect these guys? Well, it's almost impossible now. Yeah. So it's a case of when we're going into an area, we make sure that it's not the sand between the pebbles, right? It's that whole community together.
And the communities themselves, a lot of the barn story is you see volunteers actually digging the trenches themselves. Now, my understanding is that less so now? You've got build teams, but is there still volunteering?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we've come a long way, and we've come from a position where the volunteers and the local farmers, they dug everything, and it was a monumental effort, and I have absolute respect for all those volunteers that have done that. And over the time, we've and this is from building the business, we've enabled ourselves to have those connections teams, to have those civil engineering teams, to actually apply for code powers and get code powers, and then all of the regulation that comes with it. We have our own QSHE internally, and we're dealing with all of this, that we make sure when we do engage volunteers nowadays, they understand what they can do. And really the focus now is that they help dig the last mile. So they help in all their neighbours' gardens and so forth, because barn right now is still 100% underground. Yeah, I mean, there may be certain crossings, let's say, that might have to be, overhead or whatever it might be. But actually on the trunk and everything else, it's all underground. And so they're digging each other's gardens. So they're in a community and every garden's different. It's not like townhouses where you might have the same garden, 500 times over. It's a case of there's lots of undulations, there's, rose gardens, there's orchards and all this sort of stuff to deal with. And so they help dig those gardens. But they've come away from the core now, because the core is contracted out very closely with our contracting teams, and they have all their technical specifications to dig to, and so on and so on. So we've come a long way, but yeah, volunteering is still a key part, because without that, it's almost like we're coming into these areas and we're expected to do it all, where actually we're creating a partnership here. We're not expecting them to absolutely dig everything anymore, but there's still elements that they enjoy it, actually. They really enjoy coming together and digging 30 metres in the neighbour's garden, because they can have all the sandwiches and the tea, and they can chat and they go, I didn't know you lived here. Oh, this is great to meet you. And all these extra things that are happening. And it's just, I really promote that.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're just about to be CEO, but you actually started as a volunteer yourself, didn't you?
Yes. Yeah, indeed. My spark for sort of putting connectivity into the rural landscape came way before Barn, actually. And I was working for a project called CLEO, which was the Cumbria and Lancashire Education Online Network. And that was to serve 1,500 rural primary schools across Cumbria and Lancashire. And it was a case, well, all of them, in fact, and it was a case of putting in sort of that next generation technology to make sure that, the teaching and the children could get what they need. Long story short, I was involved in the installation teams. I saw what difference that made to these communities. I was hooked. Right, and it was a case when Barn came along, I came with a background of understanding how to put rural connectivity in, and it was fixed wireless access at the time, and we chose Fibre here. But as soon as it was launched, I said, I'm there, and I came along, and I was working in the evenings, splicing the fibre, and connecting things up, and working in the green cabinets and all that sort of good stuff, and just helping it along, not charging a penny. Right, it was just a case of I love this, I'm all for this. And over time, it got to the point where Barn was in a position where it could start employing people, and that's when the knock on the door happened.
Yeah, fantastic. Let's talk about stats. Where are you in terms of your build?
Yes.
How many customers have you got?
So we're predominantly based in the north of England. So we have a very contiguous patch, which is based around the Lancashire, Cumbria, North Yorkshire area, where we're actually expanding beyond that now. So we have County Durham and Northumberland, and we've got other areas such as Cheshire and Norfolk actually as well. So that's where we are. And at the moment we're around the 27,000 mark RFS, and we have around 13,500 to 14,000 connected customers on that, which is every day we're connecting new customers, which is a great thing to be doing.
Yeah, so I mean you've got about 50% market penetration, which is enviable, I think, for the altnet industry as a whole.
Yeah.
And I guess the level of engagement that you've got with the communities is a big factor.
It is a big factor, and I think it's all around, well, what are people attaching themselves to? And it's all around, I think, the branding and the internet service that they're receiving and so on. And are people then thinking about the cable infrastructure that goes out from their house? They may see the drop go to the pole. Are they thinking about anything else beyond that? Perhaps not. But for us, it's all inclusive, as in, people are taking the Barn internet service and they are then looking at the infrastructure that goes out from there, and they're saying, well, actually, we've been a part of all of this. We know exactly where it goes, and it's together, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah. And what's your build rate at the moment across all those different areas?
So the build rate is nothing, if you like, compared to what some of the big altnets are doing with BT PIA, and it's all credit to them. They're absolutely flying, and I think that's absolutely brilliant. Better connectivity everywhere. It's inherently slower in a rural build because you've got to dig the trenches, you've got to reach everybody, you've got to find a route to get there. So the connection rate isn't in the thousands, okay, it's in the hundreds per month. And we're okay with that. And the reason why is we're looking at each build as a sustainable build. So every community that we go to, we ensure when we trigger the build, and as I mentioned earlier about the stage point of triggering those builds, we are confident that we can come into that area, build it, connect the people, and it will be successful and sustainable. And then we go to the next parish and so on, and run several parishes at the same time. So we believe that working in the deepest rural, sort of the true outside in, is where we're focusing. So that's our current run rate. It's in the hundreds, not the thousands.
So when you started Barn, you were, the altnets, I don't think altnet even was a word.
Probably not.
Back then.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, there's all this competition, intense competition across the altnets. I think because certainly what we've seen is because of the level of competition in the towns, some of the altnets are actually deliberately going more rural, because it's the only way they're going to avoid overbuild. Yeah. So in the current environment, how far do you see Barn going? I mean, do you see the potential to get to double the size of the footprint, for example,
yes.
or further than that?
Potentially, yes, and I think it's where the demand will remain. And I think when you look at what the altnet's doing and what Openreach are doing, is they're sort of laying out their stalls in how many customers they're going to connect and where they're going to be building and so on. And yes, there's overbuild in several different areas. And Openreach has got fibre on our patch. I mean, it will continue to be there, and they will continue to build more. The rate at which can be debated, and whether they're going to do it all will be debated. But at the end of the day, the way we're engaging with those communities is, we believe there will still be people who nobody else is going to want to get to these. Right. They really aren't. Even with Openreach plans, are they really going to try and get to every single property? I'd like to see what happens there. But for us, having that, deep community link, and of course, the market share is half of it is because there isn't another operator, and half of it actually is because they're buying into what we stand for. And so even if there is fibre available, I think it's great that they've got a choice. Actually, they might have two. They might have an Openreach fibre and a Barn fibre that they can choose from. Well, isn't that great? Yep. I don't see a risk that will be eroded to the point where it will be unsustainable anymore. I think there will always be the demand for that very deep, rural connectivity and care of those connections and how they operate.
Well, let's talk about this question of a question I've covered on a couple of presentations. Can the niche rural broadband providers survive? And you were there at Connected North when I asked the question. You were looking around to see who was putting their hands up.
Yeah.
So of your 27,000, how much is overbuilt by Openreach today? Can you share that?
It's not that much, really.
Not that
it's a few percent, really. But yeah, I mean, in terms of that question, though, I mean, what if you asked it if Barn could survive? You know, it's because of the way we've set things up is so different, right? And I absolutely appreciate and applaud all the efforts of all the rural providers, because it is tough work. No matter how you're setting up your company, it is really hard work. And so the fact that they're going for this and wanting to put connections in there, I think that's great. But yeah, of course, I'm going to say there's going to be a place for the rural players, not just us, but I think overall, you know, the level of care that is needed, I think, on maintaining and looking after that rural connectivity is much higher, perhaps in certain ways, than urban deployments. And this is the sort of the care of the cabling systems and making sure that it, you know, if there's any, for example, in the rural space, there might be a landslip. You won't see landslips in the middle of towns. But how do you care for that? You know, it's that whole, you know, the economics and how you're building there. I think in the very deep rural, that's not going to go away. You know, even if Openreach are expanding their network and they're getting fibre in further places, I do still think there will always be a demand for that very localised connectivity and care.
Yeah. One of the phrases that sticks in my head is Clive Selley saying, "We will build everywhere," and obviously they've got this. I mean, they're building at an astonishing rate.
Yeah, absolutely.
A million premises a quarter, so 4 million a year till they get to their 25 million goal. Then what they've said is beyond that, we will build 1 million a year up to 2030. So we're everywhere. And I guess that's at the moment, you're enjoying a largely, I mean, you're the only game in town for these villages.
Yeah, sure.
But if Openreach do deliver on that and build to those, you know, build to, let's say, overbuild 80-90% of your footprint, then you're in a situation there where your retail ISP is competing with Zen, with all the big players, with BT Retail.
Yeah. That's true. And I mean, if you were Clive, would you not want to set out that stall in that way?
Absolutely.
Of course you would, right? So I think it's no surprise at all.
I'd be thinking, I'm well in the lead and I want to keep that lead.
100%. And who would blame him? I just think, you know, at the end of the day, that it's going back to that argument, I think, of the way that you're engaging with that deep rural element. Because, of course, you can put the fibre in there. You can then have many other operators on the network and have a lot of choice. That is brilliant, fantastic. And that, I know, and the different care levels of those different operators as such, that's fine. But what about that intrinsic link with that community and the additional support and care that gets? And that's where I think there's still going to remain a hook. And the market share might go down. Okay, no problem. People have choice. Some people will say, actually, I want this. That's up to them, no problem. But at the end of the day, in these communities, you know, what we're working towards is not just the connectivity, right? Is how can we support these rural communities? And what I'm talking about here is things like the digital divide. How can we solve these issues locally, where we're putting on events in the local village halls where people can come and they can learn about the internet now it's here and so on, regardless of the supplier. You know, it's those sort of extra things in, you know, localized things that a large operator would probably struggle to localize at that level, right?
For sure.
Yeah, and I think that's where, you know, localized rural operators could do that. And this is part of what we want, is supporting those communities. So yeah, I don't have a concern right now in Openreach saying that they're going to build everywhere. Great news, we can get fibre everywhere, brilliant. Okay. But I do still think there's always going to be a demand, not just for what we're doing, but for all of those rural players.
Yeah. If Openreach overbuilds, then that customer could have a choice of Barn or Zen. We're connected on Openreach. But is there any plans to go wholesale so that we could buy into your network?
It's an interesting one. It's all around the economics, right? I mean, you've seen the numbers. It'd be very difficult for anybody to try and invest, probably, and then what market share would they get? I mean, at the end of the day, it's a topic of conversation, I think. I mean, what if Barn took its ISP arm and sold it over other people's network? Right? There's that too. You know, it's an interesting idea right now, and it's going back to that point of what do people buy into. And the people buying into Barn is not just sort of the internet and what they receive, it's also all of the infrastructure and the cabling and everything else. So it's that vertically integrated thing. I don't think we see a view where we would purposely split everything off and then try and go wholesale one way or another, whether it's with our ISP or opening it for other ISPs to come onto our network and so on at the moment.
Okay. A couple of altnet CEOs have said that BT Group's finance people will get to a point where they're looking at, let's say, your footprint, looking at the cost of effectively replicating what you've already done, and saying, you know what, this just doesn't make any sense. We need to change course for some of these builds, and rather than keep the Openreach machine going, to partner up with these altnet networks. So it's still, I guess it's still the Openreach network, but it's actually using your infrastructure rather than overbuilding it. Really interested in your view as to whether you think that will happen, or whether you think BT is like, no, we want to be the only game in town.
It's an interesting question, and I think part of you've got to look at the history, and part of you've also got to think that in a few years' time, it'll be a different place again. So I think, do you really think they'll be able to do that? I'm not sure. You know, I mean, at the end of the day, you know, they're working through this machine at the moment. I don't see them moving away from that at all. I think in a few years' time, it'll be a very different place. And they might have to make that decision. They might have to look at it and say, well, it's not actually viable to build anymore, so we're going to have to engage. And I'm sure at that time, there won't be 100 altnets. There'll be a lot less. And so they will deal with a lot less people, and it might become viable to do something. That's a conversation to have at the time. But right now, my feeling, I don't think so. I think they'll try and build to as many as they can. And for those areas that aren't, I don't know whether they go there. I don't know.
I tend to agree with you.
Okay.
Because it's difficult to get my head around the idea that BT would stop the Openreach machine and say, you know what, let's partner with this altnet or that altnet, or Barn, for example.
And it would be at this level, right? They'll have this market share in you know, the United Kingdom, and they're looking at this as the final last %. Not sure.
Yeah. Let's talk about the big consolidation. So all the altnets are talking to pretty much all the other altnets about who's going to buy who and who's going to do a share deal or whatever. But Barn actually is written into your constitution that you can't be part of that, I understand.
Yeah. And
so all this is going to happen around you.
It is. It is going to happen around us, absolutely.
I mean, how do you feel about that? The fact that you've sort of written into the Constitution that we will be independent forever. Actually, very similar to Zen. I mean, we've not written into the Constitution, but I've made my own commitment that that is the way it's going to be.
Yep.
So I guess we're very similar from that point of view. All this is going to happen around us.
Yep.
And you want a model, and actually I want it too, where Barn sustains long term.
Yes, in its own right.
Sort of complementary to whatever else is going on in
absolutely. And I think that's down to sort of the core values of why have we done what we have done, and why we set it up in a way that we have. And I think it is for that long-term investment, long-term sustainability, and the fact that, you know, the whole model together of the way Barn works in working with its communities and shareholders and its build means that in the future you can do more with that, and it's going to be their choice, if that makes sense. So I think the consolidation will happen. We'll go from 100 altnets and it will come down. I have no doubt. It's already happening. And that's fantastic. And, you know, their build models are quite similar. You know, they're using a lot of Openreach PIA, where they're overbuilding the copper layer. They're using the pole infrastructure, the duct infrastructure, and they're using this similar, all the different materials are very similar. So sort of the technical specifications are quite easy to do that. And of course, we're doing the same thing with all our fibre technology. We're not reinventing the wheel here, but it's the fact that where we're going and how we're doing it. To me, I think is extremely valuable. Okay, because we're putting fibre up these access tracks a kilometre or so to these people, and it's there in the ground, and it will be for a long time. So I think it's quite a valuable thing. But that's for the communities. That is for those communities, and I don't see it being a part of another altnet or such like. We are forging our own path.
Do you use PIA at all?
I do. I think PIA has been really quite well received in the industry, and where we have used it is where we have significant geographical problems to get across. I'm talking about motorways, I'm talking about dual carriageways, rivers, canals, all these railway lines, all these big things where BT infrastructure exists on either side. And for us as Barn, if we're trying to engage with Network Rail to get across, no, let's not do that. So instead what we're doing is we're finding these routes where we can come in to a chamber, we can get across the asset and pop out the other end. And that's been instrumental in getting us places that we never thought we might be able to get geographically with our own fibre. And the other use is where you go to a small village and you will have some very old infrastructure. Fair enough, it was built a very long time ago and it's not really usable, so we had to do our own build, which could be in the pavements in a traditional Toby box style build. But neighbouring that, you've got 3 new estates that have been built over the past, let's say, 5 or 6 years. Well, they've already got BT duct infrastructure, so we were able to go in it. So we've not built, we've not lifted the sets, we've not disrupted those smaller estates of maybe 200 houses or so. We've gone in the BT infrastructure and provided our service over the top. So I think PIA has been excellent, actually. For us, it's all been underground. Poles, we would never put trunk routes on poles because we believe that long routes in the rural environment should be underground, because then if the weather comes, as it does in the storms, it remains online. Local drops to be debated, but I think right now everything is underground for us.
Have you got any stats? You've got this big focus on underground.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of the altnets, it's like whatever's the cheapest, then we'll do that. But have you got any stats on the respective reliability of a overhead versus?
I can't comment, I don't think, on overhead because we don't really have any, but certainly for underground, I mean, for reference, we have about 5.5 million metres of fibre in the ground. Okay, and this is the trunk network and the distribution, so the smaller cables to the properties and so on. And the thing for us was, Storm Arwen came along, or Storm Desmond, actually, two very big storms. And what we saw was the road infrastructure really suffered, as in the trees were coming down and so on. And we saw, the other networks infrastructure being pulled off, as in the poles were being toppled, cables were being hit by a tree and then being tensioned and snapped and so on. And that was just, it's such a hard job for anybody to put that sort of infrastructure back. Whereas what we were doing, the only thing we were concentrating on was making sure power is onto the cabinets, because obviously the power networks suffered the same fate. So we had many, many green cabinets where we were putting generator systems on and then just keeping them online, because people had their connectivity online because they had a battery system or a generator. It's quite rural, so they have their own generators usually in these places, so they kept their internet on. They were able to communicate with family and so on. So for a stats point of view, we lost practically nothing in the fibre in these storms, and we kept the power on. But yeah, looking at all the rest of it, I mean, that infrastructure was across a wide area. So yeah, I'm sorry I can't really comment on specific numbers, but from our experience, underground means that it will stay on in extreme weather events. Yeah,
sounds like a good investment for the long term.
100%, that's what we believe, and that was sort of proof in the pudding that we saw. And I don't want storms, right? But they happen, and we were able to supply that connectivity over that time.
Let's talk about one-touch switching.
Oh, of course. Yes.
One-touch switching.
Fun topic.
So when I think about Barn, your footprint, my first thought was, wow. It's like, my first thought was actually, are you even excluded from this? And
no, we're not.
And then I thought, no, no one's excluded. Yeah. Then I thought, that's got to be a huge amount of effort for next to no benefit.
Sure.
Or is it?
Well, I think the benefit is for the consumer.
Yeah.
I think it's been very difficult for all of the operators, altnet or not, to engage with this because we've all got to talk to each other. We all have our own different systems and different ways of doing things, but fundamentally the principle remains the same. And I think giving the consumer the choice and how they can work with that system is great, because instead of them fumbling around trying to find contracts and details and all the rest of it, they can say, I'd like to go here, and everything's sorted for them. Great for the consumer. I think for us, though, it's been a tough few months, I'd say, for the development teams. So, I know that Barn is a smaller altnet, but we do have all the disciplines. We have all of our, the finance, the operations, the build, the connections, the network operations, and the DevOps, right? That's all there. So we've developed, over the past years, our own centralized API system where all our different systems can talk to each other and enter Toxco. Yeah. So Toxco comes in, and here are the requirements, and we can map and build where all the different data sets are, which would need to be called upon, how do we react to that in a certain time frame, and so on. And so the team have been dealing with it. So we've passed our integration testing, which is fantastic. Our teams are on target with it, but it's going to be interesting, I think, when it really comes in. You were mentioning that you're ahead of the game here, and you've managed to have some real switches. I'm really impressed by that.
Thank you.
Because that's huge.
Thanks to our dev teams.
Absolutely, right. It's a massive undertaking, and I think when this really comes into force and everybody starts to naturally start using it, what are we going to see? Are we going to see some really odd use cases where it doesn't work?
Sure.
Right, okay, and then more generally, who's going to be switching to who, right? That's the thing for us, is that when we go into a community, we are providing our full fibre in there, and people are coming on to us. So essentially, we'd be the gaining provider in those sorts of situations. But then as time goes on and they have choice, well, they might want to go between. There's a deal here, or there's that consumer's choice. All up to them. Is that going to work successfully? Is it going to be seamless? I don't know.
Yeah.
Let's see how that goes.
Yeah.
But certainly, I think it's a really tough ask of the altnets to get to the point where we're all singing off the same hymn sheet.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, huge investment. Let's switch to your retail offering, because
sure.
I looked at your website.
Yeah.
You only got one package,
Yep.
a gig. You haven't got these 100 meg and 300 meg and any of that. So it's only a gig. It's £33 a month, which is, when you consider the amount of effort building the network, and then look at £33 a month, and just talk a bit about the build model, the business model.
Sure.
Because when I looked at your accounts, I thought, you got £3.6 million turnover, you got 76 employees. This is from your March 23 accounts.
Sure.
That equates to just £48,000 of turnover per employee. And yes, you've got funding, but I'm like scratching my head. I'm like, I know you don't need to make a profit, but you need to sustain.
Sure.
You need to sustain the business.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how does that work? Oh, and you've got to pay out interest on your shares as well. You paid out £838,000 in interest in your 23 accounts.
Yeah, absolutely.
So have you got a magic money machine?
We have not got a magic money machine. I think, really it comes to some quite significant decisions along the way. So let's start with the technology. So for the technology, we decided, and currently we're running a point-to-point network. Topic of conversation there. But so we're providing a gigabit symmetrical up and down across the whole of our network. And we thought to ourselves, okay, well, could we have a tiered package where we have some lower bandwidth, lower price packages, and then some higher bandwidth, higher price packages, and so on. And we thought to ourselves, well, actually, if you think of it operationally, because we're in control of our own backhaul, distribution, trunk network, everything, why are we restricting this? Why would we want to do that? Why would we do that to the consumer? And we thought, well, the technology that we're deploying can handle a gig symmetrical, including the backhaul and everything to do with all the contention and access to the internet. That's all sorted. We're in control of that. Okay, let's do one package, £33 a month across the board. So we don't have a mix of many low speed, low packages, and then offset with some very high cost high bandwidth packages and then it sort of equals out. We said, no, we've got a line across the middle. So that's the choice on the technology and the package. And it's a case of, if you're on a social tariff, you also get the gig, because why would you restrict it? Yeah. No point. Give them everything, all you can eat, because that's the reason we go in and do this. So that's the sort of the technology decisions behind it. In terms of the build, it's just like all the other altnets. We're taking on debt to go and build networks. So we have, as a vertically integrated company, we have all the different disciplines of the operating of the company and the building of new networks, so your OPEX and your CAPEX. So, when we're going out into new communities, we're taking on that debt. Mm-hmm. And we're offsetting with, support, subsidy from the government, which is fantastic. But I will say we went through a long period of time where the government subsidy wasn't there, and it was fully supported by, local investment from those communities taking on that debt and going and building that network. So if you think about that 76 employees, they're not all operational. So if you look at the revenues, actually it's a smaller subset of people that are actually to do with running the network and making sure the lights are on and everybody's getting what they need. And then there are elements where they're going and building that new network. And because that new network build is constant, we've never stopped. The fact that we're doing it almost on a macro level, if you think about it, at the parish level, we can bolt other parishes on continuously rather than having any sort of big stop or anything like that. So the debt is raised from all of those communities as you go along. So that's kind of the model of how we're able to support the operations and the CAPEX side. So a comment as well on the accounts. You quoted the March 23 accounts. So the March 24 accounts to be submitted is 4.9 million revenue. And actually inside of that, we've got a 1.76 million EBITDA. So, because we're choosing to sustainably build in each of these communities and we are closely monitoring what is the cost of operating this network, including the staff, we've got to make sure it's within that £33, or really it's £27.50 to us. We've got to make sure that we're servicing our debt, we're operating the network, we're buying our transits and our peering and all of it. We're doing that properly. It all sits within that figure that we're charging the customers. So it's not that, the debt that we're raising is then supporting the operations. We're not doing that. Yeah, we're making sure that is completely separate. So Barn could stop tomorrow if it wanted. We could say, look, okay, we're not building anymore, and we are sustainable.
Yeah, and that's a big growth to 24. That's about a third.
Yeah,
in turnover.
we've been going
Fantastic.
For it.
Fantastic. What, as well as offering this one package for £33 a month, one thing I noticed that was very refreshing from your website is it's very open and clear. It's like, here's a package, it's £33 a month, almost like full stop, whereas a lot of broadband providers, I mean, I'll exclude Zen from this, but a lot of broadband providers say, have this brilliant deal, and on the 1st of April every year, we're going to hike your price by CPI plus a percentage. And then, woe betide if you let it run out of contract, because we might add 50% to the cost then.
Yeah.
That's all in the small print.
Yeah, sure.
By the way.
Yeah.
So I guess, again, interesting to get your view on the whole mid-contract price hikes, out-of-contract price hikes. And I guess that, this widespread practice in the industry of sucking customers in with a great deal and then ending up ratcheting their price, so they end up paying more than they expect to pay. Yeah,
it's one where when we're engaging with communities, it's a hot topic, right? And you're going and saying, look, we can provide this thing, and it's going to be £33 a month, and that's where all the questions start. It's like, right, okay, well, what about contract length, and when are you going to put the price up or anything like that? And we say, no, it's really simple. It's this price. We've had one price increase in the whole of our time at Barn, so it's been £30 a month until April 22. April 22, we made it £33 a month, and it still remains the same. Okay, and this is making sure that, over time, if you think about it, that price is getting cheaper year on year because RPI, CPI is increasing. We're not reacting to that in the way that we're, upping everybody's price in the small print. Of course, we're monitoring this against the operation of the business to make sure that we're not faltering. This is something we absolutely pay attention to. But yeah, in terms of people, The way that we put the price rise that we did was related to, well, it's all around the operations of the entire barn business and what you're receiving, and it's very closely linked to those customers, as some of them are shareholders and so on. That conversation could happen at that level, saying, okay, we need to increase it because all the other costs are going up. Power was a big one. Data center access was a big one. All these things are going up, and they will not stop going up. So it's just a case of making sure that you're not hiding it. So just don't hide it, I think, is what I'll say, is that if you need to increase it, it could be for very good reason. And if we're doing that, if we have to do it again in the future, we would go and say, look, these are the genuine reasons why we want to do it, and everybody would know. And it isn't in any small print. It isn't it isn't automatic, shall we say. It isn't something that you buy it for 6 months at this price, and then it goes to here, and then after 1 year there, and then if you're out of contract, the other. It's trying to keep it super simple that people can go, right, I've got it. I understand what you're selling me.
Yeah, you don't have to do a GCSE maths.
No.
You
You
can
just
out what you're going to pay.
What am I going to pay? Get your calculator out. It's 33 times 12.
So even out of contract, it stays at 33,
yes,
does it?
Correct, yeah.
So I think Barn and Zen must be two of very, very few companies that don't have this loyalty penalty. When you go out of contract, you just get this out of contract price hike, so that an existing loyal customer typically pays more than a new customer, and we think that's ethically wrong, the wrong way around, and so we don't do it. But
I would agree with that. I think that's fantastic that you are doing that too.
Yeah, most of the rest of the industry did. Last question, Tom.
Sure.
I did also notice from your website that you offer a 10 gigabit per second broadband service. It's £150 a month, £360 set up. So of your 27,000, of your 13,000, 14,000 customers, how many of them thought, I need 10 gigs? And they stumped up that.
Very few. I've got to say it's very few. And if you think about the point-to-point architecture we're deploying, it was very easy to say, well, your 1 gigs are here, and if you're switching architecture, your 10s are on the end, so you can offer that up, and we did. Now, the way this has worked is when we go in our communities, we work with local primary schools, and we say, well, you can have a connection for free, and wouldn't you like that at 10 gig? So in all of our primary schools that we cover, they have a 10 gig router.
Wow.
Yeah, so they have it.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, and they get it for free. They don't pay for it. Wow. And we work with sort of the MSPs that are in that area where they do all their web filtering and content and all the rest of it. And they go, what? What are we doing? And then they can have that, and it's just unrestricted. And that's where it's come in. For residential, it's one where people say, I want to have 10 gig to do a speed test at 10 gig and show my friends that I've got 10 gig. Nobody needs it, right? 1 gig is fine. But what I will say is, I see the market moving towards using speed again as a reason to bring people on. So newer technologies, available, with XGS-PON, watch this space, right? It's a case of, if we can then be offering these higher speeds. I don't think right now. Do you think anybody needs more than a gigabit now?
No, no way.
No.
They'll still buy it.
Of course they will, right? Of course they will. But do they really need it? No, I don't think they do. You'll be looking at your usage stats on all of your consumers and saying, right, that's what they're using generally day to day. We're not seeing people, utilising that full gig. They'll burst. They'll get their downloads, no problem. But the 10 gig thing is nice. Some people do have it. We do have subscribers on it. But I think it's more entering into that new realm of generally higher speed availability across the whole of the network, which is where you'd probably see people endorse and go to 2.5 gig or 8 gig, let's say, and they'll start to take those up. But I think right now it's still a marketing thing, really.
Although, as with Moore's law of bandwidth, the exponential growth of bandwidth's continuing. So people don't need more than a gig today, but wind forward a number of years and your kids won't be able to do their homework with just a gig.
I know. Well, I was just thinking that. I've just fallen foul of the whole thing of, if you wind back sort of 20 years, nobody's going to need more than 10 megabits, are they? No, they're not going to need more than that. And now they do. And so, I've just said it, haven't I? Nobody needs more than a gig. If we watch this... Not today. If we watch this back in 10 years' time, I bet we'll be laughing, saying, of course, everybody's on 10 gig minimum now.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Tom, thank you so much. That was really, really interesting. And,
really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for watching. See you again next time.